And at 3 in the morning, I slowly heard the door opening and swishing the bottom of the door against the carpet in our room. And between our beds, we had a little footlocker that I had my glasses and a plant on, and it was just there for storage. I didn't hear much after that other than the door opening, and I was sound asleep, but it kind of brought me into being awake a little bit. The next thing I hear is this sound, this knocking over. This person in our room that was so dark that night tripped over that little footlocker.
Oh.
And he came to my side of the room, to my bed. Now I was awake. That woke me up enough to see what was happening. But all I could see in the dark of the night was someone hanging over me. And in his arm, he had the oak club, and he slammed it down on my face so hard. I broke my jaw in 2 places, and my chin was totally shattered. I cut open my cheek so that you could see the inside of my mouth, and I also almost severed my tongue off.
Ted Bundy, a notorious convicted serial killer. He was an unwanted baby. He was born on November 24th of 1946 in Burlington, Vermont, to a 22-year-old young lady, Eleanor Cowell. His mother, Eleanor, spent the night at a home for unwanted mothers giving birth to a beautiful baby boy. And Ted Bundy's father? Well, he wasn't. He wasn't a father. He was a sailor, and he didn't have anything to do with Ted Bundy. He didn't even hang around long enough to see his own son. Add to that, Eleanor, the mother, came from a deeply religious home where having a child out of wedlock was a big no-no and deeply humiliated her parents. So as soon as Eleanor gave birth to Ted, she abandoned him in Vermont, and she went back to Philadelphia where her parents lived. She returned to their home. Family members say, yeah, Eleanor had no plans at all to go back and pick up Ted Bundy, so he was abandoned. She then was going to put him up for adoption, but her parents wouldn't have it. They said, no, you don't put your baby up for adoption. So after 3 months, she returned to Ted and brought him back to live with her parents. But her parents had a condition. They said, you are going to have to cover up that he's your child. You're going to have to lie about that. So now his life of abandonment turned into a life of deceit. Ted grew up believing his grandparents were his adoptive parents, and his biological mother was his sister. This unwanted boy, abandoned and a fictional son of his grandparents, would soon turn to murder. Pride. Pride is defined as an excessive love of oneself. Characteristics include self-centeredness, superiority, and arrogance. It's the original sin because it contradicts human nature. This pride is the why behind the crime, the motive. I'm Ashley Willcott. I'm a TV anchor, a former judge, a trial attorney, and I can tell you that almost every one of the cases I've seen intersects with one of the 7 deadly sins. Pride, greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth, the opposite of the 7 heavenly virtues, temptations that taken too far turn deadly. This week, we break down the case of Ted Bundy and how the deadly sin of pride created a prolific serial killer. A little later, you don't want to miss, I'm joined by Kathy Kleiner Rubin. She's a survivor of an attack by Ted Bundy. She's also the author of A Light in the Dark, Surviving More Than Ted Bundy. And in our breakdown segment, we go deep on the how and the why of one of the biggest serial killers of the 20th century that certainly still lives on today. Let's get into it. This is the Deadly 7. Ted Bundy's childhood didn't get much better than his infancy. It's believed that his grandfather, who he thought it was his father, remember, had a nasty temper and also had an addiction to pornography. Those who knew the grandfather say he would swing stray cats by the tails, he would kick dogs, he would shout for no reason. In fact, Ted's Aunt Julia described him as a tyrant. Despite all this, though, Ted had a very, very close relationship with his grandfather. Unfortunately, obviously, not a positive role model. At the early ripe age of 3, Ted started showing a dark interest in knives. Once, he surrounded his Aunt Julia with knives while she was taking a nap. And when she woke up, she said Ted was just standing there smiling at her. By the time he was 4, Eleanor, his biological mother, who he thinks is his sister, was really worried that her father's negative actions were influencing him in a negative way. So she moved with Ted to Tacoma, Washington, to live with other family members. Now, this is an interesting dynamic. When she moved, she changed her name and started going by Louise and joined a Methodist church. It's there that she met Johnny Bundy. Their relationship turned romantic, and they got married. Ted, in the meantime, was a smart kid. He just didn't interact well with others. As a teenager, he was very bothered by the fact he was illegitimate. One of his cousins, John Caldwell, would tease him relentlessly, call him a bastard. And after that, Ted found out. He found out the truth, as is wont to happen. When he found out that Eleanor wasn't his sister, but was actually his mother, and number 2, that she wasn't even married when she had him, it wrecked him. He didn't have, by all accounts, the best relationship with his mother and was often distant from her, but evidently this discovery ruined that relationship completely. He distanced himself even further from his mother and had a deep resentment towards her. He did have a few friends at school that he would hang out with, but they were all very wealthy friends. They were very involved in the school, and they had lots of connections because of their wealth. He was often teased for the fact that he wasn't in the same social class as his peers. And his Uncle Jack, who did have wealth, tried to take him under his wing, but reportedly Ted was jealous of his uncle's wealth and wanted the same for his family. So he began to resent his cousins because they had money that he wanted, and he then resented that his mother married someone who was a middle-class worker. Add to this, Ted was shy, awkward, and reserved. He had a high IQ, and he performed well in school. But people who knew him at school noticed that he had a temper, and he would get in trouble a lot because of that temper. He had no one to turn to when he wanted to ask anything personal about sexual questions, for instance. So he started sneaking out at night to try to find pornographic magazines in the trash cans of his neighbors. Eventually, he moved from this to getting drunk and peeping into the windows of neighbors and other women. He even went so far as during school, when he thought no one was looking, he would pull down the pants of his female classmates and try to feel them up. During this time, he also had no issue stealing from people. All of these things are happening in his teenage years. His behaviors are escalating. But what happened is his intelligence and his social skills, and I would argue his good looks, enabled him to enjoy a successful college career. He developed what appeared to be normal, quote-unquote, emotional relationships with women. He got married. He could have been a lawyer, a politician. He had the skill set, he had the intelligence, he had the connections. But instead, he turned to a ghastly, horrendous, blood-soaked life. Ted Bundy kidnapped, tortured, raped, and murdered what is believed to be dozens of young women in the 1970s. It's unknown exactly how many women he killed, but he did eventually confess to murdering 30 women in 7 different states. No one really knows either when he began killing, but he did describe an incident to law enforcement and psychologists that actually began in 1969. To prey on the empathy of these young women, he would sometimes simulate some sort of physical injury or disability, asking for assistance to get close to his potential victims. He was very manipulative. He was very charismatic by all accounts. He would then kidnap these young women. On January 4th of 1974, Bundy broke into the apartment of an 18-year-old, Karen Sparks. She was a student at the University of Washington in Seattle. He bludgeoned her with a metal rod from her bed frame and sexually assaulted her with that same rod. She survived, but she was left with permanent brain damage. On February 1st, he then broke into another apartment. This is of Linda Ann Healy. He beat her unconscious, dressed her, and carried her away. Bundy later confessed that he drove her to a secluded area where he raped and murdered her before dumping her body. During 1974, women college students in Washington through Oregon and those areas disappeared at the rate of about one per month. In August of 1974, Bundy was accepted to attend the University of Utah Law School and moved to Salt Lake City. Homicides and missing persons began in that area, including 2 that remained undiscovered until shortly before he was executed in Florida, he confessed. He was on trial for kidnapping and murder in Colorado, and he was incarcerated. Ted Bundy, he escaped, eventually arriving in Tallahassee on January 8th of 1978. After one night in a hotel, he rented a room at a boarding house on West College Avenue near Florida State University. On January 15th, only a few days after he arrived in Tallahassee, Bundy entered the Chi Omega sorority house through a back door that had a faulty lock. He beat Margaret Elizabeth Bowman with a piece of wood as she slept in her bed. He choked her with a nylon stocking. Next, he entered the room of Lisa Janet Levy, beating her unconscious and bit her on the buttock and sexually assaulted her with a hairspray bottle. He also attacked 2 other victims, Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner. Both of these victims survived. There was a very well-publicized trial. Ted Bundy was all over every front page of every newspaper. He had women writing to him, fanning over him. But in 1979, he was sentenced to death for 2 murders of 2 young women.
Joining me now is Kathy Kleiner Rubin. My absolute honor and delight to have you on with me, author of A Light in the Dark, Surviving More Than Ted Bundy. And I want to first share, Kathy, before we start talking, a few of my thoughts, and then we'll dive into this entire experience. You know, I met you at a past crime con. It's been some years, but I will admit to you, I was instantly smitten because you're adorable, kind, charismatic, and just this light shining inside you. And I remember thinking, what? She's a survivor of Ted Bundy, the Ted Bundy that everybody's heard about, the prolific serial killer. She's amazing. And I will counter that by saying everybody who knows me knows I'm a huge advocate for children, for trauma that they experience, for things they go through, for helping them, for being resilient. And I understand how childhood trauma and experiences affect directly brain development and how children behave as children and adults. But it's no excuse for committing crimes. And I'm disgusted, frankly, about Ted Bundy and that he who cares what experiences he had as a kid, quite frankly, in my opinion, because there's no excuse. There's no understanding that I can possibly have of the horrific crimes that he committed against you, against other survivors, against children, against older women, against everyone, and a serial rapist and murderer, and his arrogance, because he had the looks, I think, that also said to me that he thought he could use his charm and his charismatic personality, his manipulation to get anyone he wanted and then do anything he wanted to those people. Really, truly a disgusting human being. Let me just turn it over to you. I would love for you to hold up your book and just tell us a little bit about your experience writing this book. I'd like to start there.
First off, thank you for inviting me today. I'm very happy and honored to be with you. Um, my book was in my mind for many years, and I wanted to do it. I wanted to tell my story, and I wanted to mention all the women that he killed and murdered. And I do so in the book. I name them by name. But it was a roller coaster, of course, with emotions and love as I spoke and told my book. And years ago, I wanted to write a chapter. So I sat down and started to write, but my husband and my son were at a baseball game. And I was sitting at home thinking of the past. And it was like, I'm not doing this. I want to be out there at the baseball game. So over the
Mhm.
years, many years, I wanted to tell this story. And I wanted people to know who I am and what I've been through. And hopefully it'll help others who go through adversity in their lives.
Whew. If I start crying during this interview, there are lots of good reasons for that, because the healing I know that can happen in speaking your truth and talking about your experience, writing about your experience. It obviously doesn't make it go away,
Right.
but it can help, I know, provide some of that healing. I know at the time you were a student at Florida State University. And I remember talking to you about this at CrimeCon when we met, because you were a coyote at the university. And as I remember it, you described that you had a really close group of girlfriends in high school and that you knew at home. And your close group of girlfriends then went to FSU together and were in the sorority together. And I'm going to tell you, I love my husband, but the way that I think we both survive in life is he has his guy friends and
Yeah.
I have my girlfriends, and we recognize the value of those things. And so you're here with all your friends in an environment that to me would be just a perfect place to go to school and have these experiences. And listeners can recall, and I talked about in the section before you joined us, that he got into the Cayo house and murdered two of your sorority sisters, obviously attempted to kill you and your roommate. So tell us what first of all, had you even heard of Ted Bundy as you were in school and with your friends at FSU?
No, I had not. I was in the sorority and sophomore when I was attacked, and I wasn't into national news. I was at frat parties and going and singing sorority songs. So, no, I did not know anything about him until afterwards, and I read as much as I could about him and understood what he portrayed and what he really was.
And I think part of the reason he picked where he went was exactly what you just said. You were living the proverbial college experience when you're not supposed to be watching national news. You're supposed to be having that life experience of enjoying your friends and enjoying parties and doing those fun things. So, do you remember? And I don't want you to tell too much, because I do want people to look at and purchase and read A Light in the Dark: Surviving More Than Ted Bundy, because it's an amazing story. But having said that, do you remember what happened to you?
Yes, I do. I have a vivid memory of the day, the morning of the attack. That was on January 15th. On January 14th, it was a Saturday, and I went to a wedding, some friends, and then we went and had a potluck dinner. And around 9:30, I said, I have to go home now because I have a calculus test on Monday. And I wanted to make sure I studied for it so that I would, you know, open the book and at least know what it was about. So, excuse me, that was on the 14th. And on the 15th, we decided, my roommate and I, to go to bed. And 11:30, we turned off the lights and we both went to bed. Our room was on the second floor of the Chi Omega sorority house, and our window faced the back parking lot. When you come into the sorority, there was a beautiful wooden staircase that was outside. I mean, that as soon as you walked in, you saw it. It was beautiful. But during the night, I didn't know that someone had come into the back of the sorority house through the door that was actually broken. The lock wasn't working. And as he came up that back door in the middle of the night, he picked up a plug, a piece of oak from the firewood we had placed by the door. And he came in that door and he slowly walked through the sorority house. And when he got to the front of the house, he saw that wooden staircase and he went up to the landing. And if you look at the sorority house, on each side of the hallway were the bedrooms for all the sisters. And he turned and took a right. And that was my bedroom, my hall. I didn't know it, that he was carrying that club. And the first room he went into was Margaret Bowman's room. He bludgeoned her and attacked her and strangled her and left her to die. But before he did, he took the sheets and brought them up to her chin so it looked like she was sleeping. He crossed the hall and went to the next room, and that was Lisa Levy's room. He went in, closed the door, and attacked her with that same club that he had just killed Margaret with. He did other things to her, and one of the things he did was to bite her. And actually, that bite mark was like a fingerprint that they could connect him to be in the sorority house that night. He left her to die. He crossed the hall again, and he came into my room, room number 8. My room was a normal size of of a dorm room. And we had twin beds on each side of the walls, and our curtains were always open because we had plant rods hanging down. And it was a beautiful room, always sunny. And at 3 a.m, I slowly heard the door opening and swishing the bottom of the door against the carpet in our room. And between our beds, we had a little footlocker that I had my glasses and a plant on, and it was just there for storage. I didn't hear much after that other than the door opening, and I was sound asleep, but it kind of brought me into being awake a little bit. The next thing I hear is this sound, this knocking over. This person in our room that was so dark that night tripped over that little footlocker.
Oh.
And he came to my side of the room, to my bed. Now I was awake. That woke me up enough to see what was happening. But all I could see in the dark of the night was someone hanging over me. And in his arm, he had the oak club, and he slammed it down on my face so hard. I broke my jaw in 2 places, and my chin was totally shattered. I cut open my cheek so that you could see the inside of my mouth, and I also almost severed my tongue off. He went and was standing there to hit me again, but my roommate woke up and started to stir. He went across the room to her, tripped over that footlocker again, and started to attack her. He hit her with the same oak log and broke her jaw and lacerations on her face. And then he heard me moaning. I was made myself into the smallest little ball I could make because I thought if he couldn't see me, he wouldn't kill me. So I'm over there moaning and groaning, but all I'm making are gurgling sounds because of all the blood in my mouth. And he came over to kill me. I knew it. But just as he was standing over me again, the room lit up. It became really bright in the bedroom, and I could see him now, and he could see me. And he didn't know where that light was coming from. He didn't know if he had been seen or not. He became really antsy and squirrely, and he ended up leaving my bedroom, running down those beautiful stairs and out the front door. And then my room became dark again and black. And I'm in my bed, hurting and hurting. My face felt like knives and everything in it. And again, I'm gurgling, asking for help, but no one could hear me. After a while, my roommate woke up and walked into the hallway to go look for help. And as she did, there were some sorority sisters outside in the hallway. Now, Bundy had turned off the lights in the hallway on the sconces, so that it was very dark in there. And my roommate came out, and the sorority sisters are, "What are you doing?" And she was staggering. So they opened the door and turned on the light, and there she saw the blood on her face. And they looked toward my bed, and they saw how I was injured and the blood that was all over the bed and on the walls. That was the night I remember. And I remember the paramedics. And there was a police officer that came in and stood next to my bed and kneeled down and said, "It's okay, honey. We're going to take care of you. Don't worry." And I remember in that instance, I knew that guy wasn't going to come back and attack me again because the police officer was standing next to me. The paramedics came and did what they could for me and carried me down those wooden staircase on a stretcher and out the big door, double doors of the sorority. And as they were carrying me down, it was cold and misty outside. And I saw the lights of the police and the ambulance and the fire trucks, and they were all swirling around. And I could hear on their walkie-talkies them all talking to each other, and it was squawking. And I looked to the side, and I thought I was at a carnival because all the lights and everything just took me to a happy place. So I saw my carnival, and then in just a few seconds it was gone, and they took me into the ambulance.
Oh, I have to ask, was he wearing a mask? Because I envision that he wasn't. You said you saw him. And Kathy, all I can think is what an arrogant piece of shit that he. Did you just see his full face? Was he just standing there like no big deal?
Standing over me, and he was wearing dark clothes and no mask, but I didn't have my glasses on, so I couldn't see his face real clear. But yeah, he was in our. He never said a word. He came over and attacked us, and he didn't say, "I'm going to get you," or anything, which I found odd. I would think he'd be saying something, but he was in a frenzy. He just did what he wanted to do. And if that light had not shown up into our room, I can imagine he left us to die, closed the door, and would have gone to the next room. And who knows how many Chi Omegas he would have killed that night.
Yeah, absolutely. Whew, you are a survivor and my hero. Let's talk about, let's fast forward. There's so many things I want to talk about, but I want to fast forward because you testified against him. We know that he was caught. We know he went on trial. How was it for you, Kathy, when you walked into that courtroom and had to see him for the first time?
The first time I saw him actually was at the deposition. I was
Okay.
subpoenaed, and we lived in Miami, so I was flown up to Tallahassee, and I didn't know what to expect. And I went into the conference room and sat down at the head of the table, and there was a prosecution on one side and the defense lawyers on the other side. And I sat down and I looked up, and Bundy was at the head of the table. I remember him vividly wearing a light blue jacket and a white shirt. And he was just sitting there staring me down, and I wasn't afraid. I actually thought, this guy, this guy's who hit me and who killed my sorority sisters and who had killed 32 women before he came to us that night. But the prosecution and the defense were asking me questions. And defense, I don't remember, excuse me, all the questions, but I do remember the defense trying to make me sound like I was asking for it. And they said, do you go to bars late at night? And
Oh,
do you walk alone to your sorority house? And do you wear short, short dresses? And were you enticing him to come into the sorority house? And they actually made me feel like I needed to defend myself. And after it was over, I looked up and Bundy was just staring, just like, antsy, like, let's get over this. Nothing's going to happen. And that was the first time I saw Ted Bundy after the attack. And the next
let me
time,
stop you there.
okay,
Before you go to the next time, I just have a couple of thoughts.
okay,
First of all, we have come a long way in our criminal justice system. By that, I mean we've gotten a little bit away from what used to always happen, which is blaming the victim, ruining their credibility, throwing you under the bus to
yeah,
try to make it seem like you're not believable. It's your fault he did this. It still happens, and it's a problem in our criminal justice system, but I think that we've gotten a little more aware of you don't victim shame, first of all, because it's obviously not a victim's fault. But also, when you told me that, all I could think about, and it was all I could do, I was biting my tongue to say, again, the pride, sitting at the head of the table. Who the hell puts him at the head of the table when he's the one on trial for these atrocious crimes? I, did you have any thought of that? Like, why is he sitting there at the head of the table during my deposition?
I just stared at him. I didn't put any of those thoughts together. I knew where I was sitting and I had no idea he was even going to be there. I just didn't know what the process was going to be. And when I did sit down and look up and saw him, that was it was interesting because I wasn't afraid, like I said. I just thought what a sick guy he is, because I knew that he had done these things and he had killed so many women and that he had tried to kill me and my roommate. And I was just in a mode of just I didn't understand everything that was going on, but that when I saw him, I tried to visualize him in that room that night, but it was a big conference room, the lights were on, and he was sitting there and he didn't have that black clothing on, and he didn't have the club over his head. So it was weird. It was weird seeing him that way.
And what do you think? I do talk about the seven deadly sins because every case I've ever seen, covered, been on the bench for, motive always connects to one of them. And for me, there are lots of different things that can make up the motive and pieces of each deadly sin. But to me, in this case, it really was his pride and his arrogance. What do you think the motive was and why he did it before we talk about the next time you had to see him?
I've read a lot about him. And he was two people, but because he wanted to portray himself as the good guy, as a politician wannabe. And he actually was on a hotline for the, suicide hotline. And can you imagine feeling like you're gonna commit suicide and having Ted Bundy on the other end of the line telling you whatever he would say? But, he was manipulative and he knew what he was doing. He didn't like, go off the bench and just start killing people. He was a loser. He had issues. He had a lot of issues and he knew what he was doing. And when he attacked women, he came from behind and he attacked them with a crowbar or
No.
with another piece of blunt object. And as he did that, and they would fall down, he would get them into his VW Bug, which had no side seat. Everything was taken out, so he could just place the body on the passenger side. And he knew what he was doing. He wanted to possess that person, that figure, that woman. It wasn't so
Mm.
much sexual, but was for possession. He wanted to feel holding her, and he wanted to feel her life slipping away. But he didn't kill them all at one time. A lot of them he took into the woods and dumped, and they weren't dead yet. And he would go back to their bodies and put on makeup and put on lipstick and fix their hair, and then he would have sex with them again. And a lot of times you can't imagine what those women went through, and even after they were dead, what he did to them.
Let's go back, Kathy, to now the second time you see Ted Bundy after let me I'm not gonna go there. I wanna talk about something else, and then we'll go
Okay.
there.
Okay.
What always amazed me about Ted Bundy and reading about him is the fanning over him by women. He confessed to many of these crimes, and yet he had a following, and they loved him, and they wrote him letters, and they loved how he looked. I've never understood that. But as you're describing what the coward, I would say a coward, did to these women, coming up from behind, using a blunt force object, and then dressing them and putting their makeup on and doing unspeakable things to them as they lay dying. How could he possibly have had all these women fawning over him? Do you ever think about that aspect of it?
The women that he killed and abducted were just normal women. They didn't have a following. They weren't following him as far as a serial killer. And he would go into their rooms at night and attack them and then take their bodies into the VW and then dump them into the woods. And it was so weird that he knew what he was doing. He wasn't a psycho. He knew he didn't have two brains. He knew what he was doing, and he wanted to do it to possess that woman, to have ownership of her, and to hold her as she died. And it was strictly that was the motivation. Sexual contact, he did, but it wasn't like, I'm going to kill her and rape her. It was two different things as he approached women. And if a man came around when he was talking or doing something, he would leave. He never wanted to
Whoa.
confront a male. And it was just about the female form. And it was just heck. But he would then go and have these demons in him. When he wasn't out there trying to be a great guy, he had issues, and he would go into his dark place. And that was what motivated him at that dark space. But he knew the difference. And the women that were all over him, even at the trial, there were these young women, and they were, "Ooh, ooh." And I think they they could see the bad boy, but they were safe in their chairs. They
Mm.
could be into this, and he was so wonderful and good looking. They didn't realize what he was. So they felt safe, and I think they wanted a bad boy, and he was, but they weren't going to get hurt by him. So they could follow him and see everything that he was doing, but it didn't bother them. I think they needed a life. I don't think they had enough to go on, that this became their importance in life, was to fawn over Ted Bundy.
Yeah, really great points that they were safe in their chairs. So now I think he's just an arrogant coward.
Yes.
Let's move now. If you would tell us about what it was like seeing him the second time. You did the deposition, you got through that. Then you have to testify in trial.
Yes, I actually went to the grand jury session, and I was
Hmm.
in there, and he was in there as well. And that was more of a blurb to me. I don't have a lot of memory of that situation. And again, I saw him, and I was stronger. I was stronger at that point, and I wasn't scared. And I just saw that he was wasting his time there. Nothing was going to happen. But as we know, something did happen. When it was time for me to testify in the courtroom, I was subpoenaed again, and it was held in Miami, which is where we lived, and it was a circus. The courtroom was just hard to get into, and my dad would take me to the back door, and the clerk would usher me in through the back door so I didn't have to be attacked by the reporters. And I went upstairs to the courtroom, and they put me into a conference room. And in there were the paramedics that had tended to me that night, and the police officer that was standing next to me that night. And I could hug them and just not give them enough good thoughts that they were there and helped me. So it's my turn now. I go into the courtroom with my bright red dress. As soon as I could find something bright, I put it on in my closet, and I wore white sandals with pantyhose. And I walked through that courtroom standing straight up, and I sat down in the witness chair, and I looked around the room, and there was Ted Bundy sitting at the defense table and the prosecution. I don't remember a lot of their questions going back and forth. I think that the defense side was saying, is this the guy that came into the room you allegedly attacked you? The defense asked me a lot of questions, and the one I remember most is they asked me, is this the man you allegedly came into your room and attacked you? Is this him? And I had to say, I don't know. I didn't have my glasses on. The room was dark. I was under the blankets in a little ball. So I've been upset all these years that I didn't help convict him. My story did not put him away by my words and my testimony. And that has hurt me. Not hurt me. I feel bad for myself that I wasn't allowed to do that and testify and help get him committed.
Listen, you were honest, and when you walked in to that grand jury in a red dress and your stockings and your white sandals, I think I would have started applauding because I absolutely love that that was the approach you took. And the reality for all witnesses, for all victims, the truth is the truth. If you didn't see them or if you can't identify them, that doesn't take away from the fact you're a victim and the person can get convicted. You may feel bad, but the important part of our criminal justice system is the truth, right? And so
Yes.
you did
Yes.
that. You went and told the truth. We know at the end of the day, he was convicted. He was given the death sentence for 2 murders and another death sentence for the rape and murder of a 12-year-old girl. We know he was killed by the state of Florida as a result of that. And I can't think of how do I say this? I know there's a lot of talk about death penalty, not death penalty, but at the end of the day, this is certainly someone who I think it is an appropriate sentence for in terms of the horrific things that he did. I want to read you a quote. By the time Kleiner Rubin testified at Bundy's televised trial in 1979, the country saw a poised young woman on the witness stand who appeared completely healed. Emotionally, she said she was far from it. Tell us about that.
I was home in Miami. My mouth was wired shut when I was in Tallahassee, and I went to an oral surgeon, and he had to re-break my jaw because it wasn't aligned correctly. And he reset it and tied my jaws together, and he actually had to put a bone in my chin because it was so shattered. I was wired shut for 9 weeks, and during that time, it was hard to communicate. I did the best I can talking through my teeth, and the liquid I could drink was whatever came through a straw, and that was a long 9 weeks.
That was it.
I was
Yeah,
huh?
because that's all you could have, right? Anything
Yes,
through a straw was the only thing
yes,
you could have.
yes, yes. My
Oof.
sister used to come up with ideas with cream of wheat with garlic and cheese and blend it up, and the one she came up with was, baked beans, and she blurred that all up, and I'm like, "No, don't do that again, that's really nasty." But my family was around me, and I had to get better, and I wanted to get better for them because They were going through a lot, but we never talked about it. So they were living in their own little hell, looking at their daughter all messed up and not being able to communicate. And they also saw me as their poor little daughter who had gone through other things in her life and thought that I wouldn't come out of this one, but I did. And because I'm strong, I had a black mass behind me, cloak enveloping me, and it was scary and black, and I didn't wanna live that way. I didn't wanna be afraid to leave the house or go do something. So in my mind, I saw a little island way out in the ocean. It was like a speck, and on this island was one palm tree and one beach chair, and I saw that, and it was light and bright, and the sun would reflect off the water. But I didn't think I'd ever reach that island, but I did, and I did it by taking baby steps. I call it something that was healing me by baby steps. And after I took a few, I looked behind me, and this black mass that I was afraid of were baby steps behind me. And it took me a while, but I finally got closer and closer to my island. And I saw the palm tree and the beach chair, and I looked out over the ocean, and I couldn't see anything else. It was just a big ocean. And I got to my island, and I sat in the beach chair, and I put my toes in the sand, and that black mass was nowhere around. I couldn't see it, and I had walked away from something that was traumatizing me.
Oh my gosh. Remarkable journey, a remarkable journey. Do you mind sharing? You said there were other things that you had to overcome from when you were younger. Do you mind sharing a few of those things? And I just want to remind everyone you can read much, much more in your book, A Light in the Dark Surviving More Than Ted Bundy.
I slowly began to die when I was 12 years old in the 6th grade. I was always sick and very tired and had a low-grade fever, and Mama took me to a pediatrician who said, "I don't know what's wrong with her, but she's really sick." And they took me to Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami, and I was there for 3 months in the hospital. They didn't know. They couldn't figure it out. They finally said after 3 months for Mom and Dad to take me home and keep me comfortable. The prognosis was grim. My parents did so, very upset, and a doctor from Cuba came and talked to Mom and Dad, and she said, "I think I know what might be wrong with her. I think she has systemic lupus erythematosus, and that's a form of lupus where it attacked my body." After she talked with Mom and Dad, she suggested I have experimental chemo, and I'd like to do that with Kathy. And they're like, "Yes, anything that might save her." So I was taking my chemo. I took months of it, but after my second session, I lost all my hair. I was homebound. I couldn't go out, and no one could come in, and I was alone. And I was alone with no hair, and I was alone with no friends. I I just had a horrible time that year in 7th grade. I was homebound, and it was something that it was horrible. Sometimes I would get so lonely, I would pick up the phone and dial 0 just to talk to the operator, to have
Ugh.
someone to talk to. Sometimes they would talk to me, and other times they said they were too busy, but I was reaching out. I was reaching out to whomever I thought. Mom and Daddy worked all day, and my sister went to school. So when they finally came home, I acted like I had been up all day, although I had been in bed. And I put on my shorts and my flip-flops, and I sat in the living room and watched TV. But I was felt horrible. But I wanted them to think I was good because that helped them. to understand that I was okay and that I would make it through. So I didn't leave the house until the end of my seventh grade of school. I talked to mom and dad, and they said, "No, you can't go anywhere." And then I thought, well, can I go to church? That would be a good thing to do. And my parents said, "All right, you can go to church." So we sat in the back of the church, in the back of the chapel, and I got to listen to the service. And then when it was over, and people started to come out, mom and dad like swift me away to the car, and I didn't get to see anyone. So after that, I said, "I want ice cream." So we went, and dad went into the store and got us ice cream, and I ate it in the car, and I felt normal again. I felt that this was okay and I was going to get better. But I didn't know it. But 10 days after that church visit, I came down with shingles. I had shingles up and down my face, on my cheek, down my neck, and it hurt. It was something I didn't need
I
to
can
go
hear
through,
you,
but
yeah.
I had to go through it because it was there.
So, Kathy, tell us more. You are diagnosed with lupus. I just have to say, I knew this about you, but listening to your story, how smart you are and a little mischievous. Things like thinking of saying, I know, okay, mom, dad, can I go to church? Because you were so desperate to get out of your home and to have contact, and you knew who's going to say no to that. So you go to church, it gives
Yeah.
you a new lifeline. Tell us more.
When I went to church, we sat in the back of the chapel, and it was almost over, so we began to leave after some of the people had already walked down the aisle to leave, and my parents swished me away into the car, and I said, "I want ice cream." So we went to the ice cream place, and, dad went out and got our ice cream and brought it to the car, and I was like, enjoying it. I mean, it's the best ice cream I'd ever have. And not 10 days after I had gone out, I came down with shingles. And now
Oh,
I had shingles all over my face, down my neck, and it was horrible. It was horrible. It seemed that that was almost the worst thing I had gone through. But, I made it through, and it was time to go back to school. No one knew me. The kids I hadn't seen in a year and a half, they didn't know who I was. So I entered high school, and I actually joined theater, and I was in the drama class, and I could be anything and anyone I wanted to be except that sick little kid that was homebound in 7th grade and so alone. That was that was good for me. And then that's when I decided to go to Florida State University. But during my recovery after the attack and after I felt like I was getting better after my island, I became nervous and uncomfortable to be around men because I didn't know who attacked
Mm.
me and it was in the dark and everything. So I figured, where will I see the most men in the quickest amount of time to get over this? So I went to work in a lumber yard, and most men came in. It was rapid fire. I'd see all these guys, and as I was doing their transactions, I would look them in the eye, and I would say, "Thank you for coming in. Have a nice day." And it was important to me to look at each one in the eye. And after a while, maybe 1 or 2 would come down and bother I would feel uncomfortable, so I hid under the desk, and another person took care of him. And then I stood up, and I said, I'm okay. I'm over this." So I quit my job.
Kathy, I didn't know that part at all. And first, let me tell our listeners and our viewers that you are very petite. So you could literally hide under the desk, whereas myself, taller, might not be able to. And this is an incredible story of strength and resilience. And just before we do need to wrap, is that strength and resilience something that you feel like was given to you not by choice because of your illness, because of your shingles, that enabled you to survive the prideful, arrogant, despicable Ted Bundy?
I think I just did it naturally. I was always strong and, hard-headed and just did what I wanna do, and this was just something I wanted to do. I wanted to get better. I didn't wanna stay home in a room, and I didn't wanna be afraid of Bundy, so I didn't do anything. I knew I did nothing wrong. I knew this was something
Good.
that was put on me. My lupus, I did nothing wrong. And when Bundy attacked me, I was asleep in my bed. I didn't do anything wrong. So I didn't have that I wish I had done something different. But
Right.
getting over each one was for me and for my family, for my parents, because I can't imagine the angst they were going through during this time, seeing their little daughter sick. But I did, I got through it, and I know we're wrapping up, but I've also had breast cancer, stage
Oh,
2 breast cancer, and I had chemo for that, and I lost most of my hair, but not all of it. So it was like 9 months of chemo, but I only had 1 session, and after that 1 session, I had 1 more. I didn't see the big picture as having 8 more chemo sessions. I just saw 1 more. And that helped me to go through that and to, um, realize that I was strong enough to do it in my way is 1 more session. So I was married now and just enjoyed life. It was a good place to be.
you're such a great example of a strong woman and the fact that not your fault. We can't control what happens to us, but we can control how we react to what happens to us. And you, my friend, are an amazing, amazing hero for handling it and your sense of humor and your kindness and really you're again a little mischievous about the funny like the ice cream. That was funny to me. It's like, I want ice cream. We're getting ice cream. You have embraced life in a way that, inspires me. So again, your book that I recommend to everyone, A Light in the Dark: Surviving More Than Ted Bundy. Kathy, I cannot thank you enough. There it is, so everybody knows what it looks like, can look for it. I cannot thank you enough for joining as we talk about the 7 deadly sins and what made Ted Bundy murderous, and, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me, Ashley.
Always.